A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Masterclass 1 of the International Directors Summit for 2019. On behalf of the organizers, thank you so much for spending your morning with us, and we all hope that you have a very fulfilling and informative morning. Today, we'll be talking about turning sustainability and climate crisis into a business opportunity. In this day and age, ignoring the signs of change is at your own peril, but there are also opportunities to be had. Businesses related to sustainable development goals could open up opportunities to the tune of $12 trillion and increase employment by up to 380 million jobs by 2030. In fact, it is a very stark stat that all of those in school today, the kids in school today, are actually going to be working at jobs that have not been invented as of yet. Our speakers today are Datin, Sunita, Mei-Lin, Rajakumar, founder of the Climate Governance Initiative Malaysian chapter. She's also the chairman of Caring Group Pharmacy Berhad. We also have with us this morning Michael E.Long, head of Sustainability Asia for Lendlease Corp. Please welcome them to the stage.
So thank you very much, everyone, for turning out for this first masterclass. I wanted to start with just recapping. I think companies with the concept of limited liability has arguably been the single largest creator of value, of wealth creation in the world. But the problem with the company being a virtual entity is that it's enlivened by human actors. So there isn't a specific thing that you can or cannot do with a company, and that's why we have all these rules, regulations, principles that dictate how companies need to operate. And with sustainability coming onto the radar, and SDGs in particular, so we have companies starting to think outside their boundaries of how they do business. And while SDGs are important, what I also wanted to emphasize, focus on this today, was the importance of climate action, and for boards, for members of boards of directors, the number one financial risk, which is the impending climate emergency. So what are the risks? And Mark Carney, Governor of Bank of England, has repeatedly said that companies which don't adapt will go bankrupt without question. There are two aspects of this financial risk that we need to manage. Number one, it's damage to assets that you have, stranded assets that might experience unanticipated or premature devaluation, or becomes a liability because of the increased cost of business or legal actions. And number two, transition risks, which are things like changes in regulations that governments have to put through, or legal liability, because that way of conducting business is no longer acceptable. And we're in an environment also where past track records are no longer a predictor for the future, especially in an uncertain environment. At the beginning of this year, World Economic Forum issued a set of principles which they call Climate Governance Initiative. And this is how boards of directors, especially non-executive directors, can approach the management, the risk management of the financial risks arising from climate change. After all, if companies fail to adjust, they will fail to exist, and there's an estimated 23 trillion in global losses for the next 80 years if we carry on with business as usual, which is going to lead to a 4 degrees warmer world. So we're looking at increased transparency, enhanced disclosures, because investors are going to look at this as a proxy to the quality of management thinking. Has management recognized this as a financial risk, and what are they doing to manage this? Investors are also in this drive to decarbonize globally. No investor can afford to ignore this because it's a business critical and a systemic risk to the financial system. So with this, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael Long from Lendlease. He's going to walk us through Lendlease's way of thinking, the philosophy. They not only develop assets, but they are long-term investors. So I think he's going to show us that not only is it good business, it's great long-term stewardship of assets, not just company assets, but of the environment as well. And we would like to take questions throughout the presentation, so please feel free to raise your hands, jump in, and just ask at any stage. Okay? Let's give a warm welcome to Michael. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me today. To give you a bit of background, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, but prior to my role in Asia, I was in a global role at Lendlease, so I was dealing a lot with directors and boards. So what I'll try and do today is give you a bit of a flavour of how we've approached it as an organisation, what are some of the macro challenges we've found, and how we're trying to integrate that into organisational strategy and how best we can sort of approach this. Okay, so look, it's always important to consider why you're doing what you're doing and how your organisation plays a particular role in the broader landscape. So if we look at the built environment, and I'll talk a little bit about Lendlease, but the built environment is really approaching around 40% of global emissions. So as a contributor, you look at the emissions in the construction materials, the concrete, the steel, the aluminium, brickwork, blockwork, aggregates, and you look at the intensity of fuels and so forth that go into the production, manufacturing, transport of that, and then you actually look at the life cycle of the built environment, you see that the built environment has a huge opportunity. So when we also combine that with, you look at building stock around the world, and you'll see that 2/3 of the population will live in cities, and also 60% of the buildings that we have today will be here in the next 50 years. So what we're really creating today is a true legacy in all aspects of that. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. So when we take a look at climate change, you know, beyond arguing the science really behind it, we are actually starting to see lifestyles change, and you are actually starting to see records continually be set for extreme weather conditions around the world, and these are really felt by the mums and dads, just not by corporate organisations and investors. You are starting to see how lifestyles and how cities operate functionally change over this time due to these events. These are two images from the Asian Development Bank of all things, but if you look at Asia, you'll see the degree to the left-hand side is the percentage of land mass that will be affected by sea level rise. Okay, so this is, you start seeing actual shifts in where populations are moving, and if you're a leader of a mayor of a city, or if you're a leader of a country, these things start becoming very, very critical macro issues to the growth of your economy, your GDP, as well as the health and well-being of your people. And to the right, you start seeing in the dark blue, that is your typical Paris consensus scenario about achieving a 2-degree increase in climate change. But if we have a business as usual, what a lot of people similarly aren't aware of in Asia is that that can actually have a far greater exponential increase in temperature in Asia. Okay, so what might be 2 degrees in some parts of Geneva could quite easily be 3.5 and 4 degrees in parts of Asia. So if you think, let's say in Singapore, where your average temperature might be sitting around about 28 degrees a year, if that's sitting up around about 32, that has quite significant ramifications for how actually the city operates and functions. Also, you know, as Datin mentioned, the insurance industry, okay, there is no, I guess, the insurance industry is a great indicator of really how real the cost of climate change is becoming, okay? Now, if you look at the price you pay to insure your car, you look at the price you pay to insure buildings, at the end of the day, when these assets are affected by extreme climate and weather conditions, they are the first real barometer to have a real financial record of what's actually occurring over time. And you'll actually start to see that assets in certain locations can become quite easily stranded or become very difficult to insure. So these are all things that a property company does need to think about, not only in the assets you have in your portfolio, but if you're a director of a board, you need to think about where you actually do and don't want to operate. Are you actually going to put a manufacturing facility or own an operation area that you know actually is starting to have a greater increase in typhoons or what is the exposure of that asset to flooding and sea level rise? Wow, what a start. 55 billion tonnes of biomass, fossil energy, metal and minerals extracted from the earth every year, okay? And for a real estate organisation that is heavily reliant on construction materials, this is not just an emotive issue, this is actually a real business issue, okay? So with all these things that I'll talk about today, there is a real risk, but there is actually a real opportunity. So as I like to say, it's not all doom and gloom, and depending on which board of directors I'm talking to and who's in the room, I might often have to lean on the risk side of the equation and the legal liability and the cost to business. But another part of the business is certainly more interested in, well, what does that mean for our future customers, where we operate, the geographies we are, and our type of business? So when you are a real estate organisation like Lendlease, we do start to look at, right, well, what's happening in Asia? So as you can see, the governments around Asia are committing to climate reductions in various targets. You can see the targets that we've got there: Singapore, Indonesia, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia. So these things are actually happening, and if you're a business operating in these countries, you really want to actually understand that macro landscape, because that actually does become quite important. And to the right, everywhere you can see a colour there, but unfortunately the rest of the world map seems a bit light. You'll see that is really a map of everywhere where an emissions trading scheme or a carbon tax or equivalent has been or is being implemented. So you're actually starting to see the financial mechanisms behind backing this up. It's no longer just a kind of a corporate disclosure sort of a pathway. This is actually really starting to map the true flow of capital. And look, certainly one thing is worthwhile doing if you are on a public listed company is spend some time and have a look who your biggest investors are and find out how many of those have committed to climate reductions. And that was an exercise we did as an organisation, and we presented back to our board to see that more than 25% of investors in our organisation had actually made public commitments around climate reduction and carbon reduction. So if they've made those commitments, you know that those questions are going to come back to your organisation. So BlackRock is one of our institutional investors, and as we've all heard the quote from Larry King with regards to organisations starting to disclose and be held accountable for their non-financial performance as well as their financial. But these are things that are actually critical for a board to really understand, because they are, in a way, your investors are one of your key customers. Okay, and when, as we mentioned there with Allianz, you start looking at 12 of the largest investors committed to transition their investment portfolio to a net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050. So if those insurers are organisations that your company is partnered with or uses, then it's something you really need to be aware of. Now, this stuff is a maze, and I've worked in the industry for a lot of years, and if you're a director, it can almost be overwhelming going, where do I start, where do I stop? And I've been from one end of the spectrum and writing these responses for an organisation, spending 2 months, right the way through to writing global responses for Lendlease around CDP, Dow Jones. We've recently done under GRESB. What's really important to these things in my mind, if the lessons I've learned is, if your organisation practices true transparency, it can alleviate the need for you to try and respond to everything under the world, okay? So first and foremost, try and maximise your ability to be transparent. Try and be bold as an organisation to know that if you do set a target and you don't meet it, it is far better to have done that and bring people on the journey than what is a natural instinct for a lot of organisations is to sort of say, well, we're not quite perfect there, but when we get it perfect, then we're going to announce a target and we know we're going to get there, therefore we're just going to report against it for the next 3 years. You are far more recognised and rewarded for actually going for something bold. You don't know how you're going to get to there, but it actually drives the organisation. And as long as you're transparent along the journey, it's a much more compelling and genuine, authentic purpose of the organisation. People actually find it far more engaging, And actually, it is actually quite motivating in the organisation because you do start driving innovation because people don't have the golden bullet that's going to get you to that 20% target, okay? And the other thing I'll talk about with regards to all these will all ebb and flow, but there is no point doing these if they aren't embedded in your organisation. So a good example is, let's say, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, up the top there. If you fundamentally look at what it drives, it really looks at governance from one side of the spectrum, your HR issues, how much is your CEO paid versus your lowest paid person, what's your labour rights issues, bribery and corruption, supply chain, environmental performance, carbon commitments, employment, all these sort of factors. It's a brilliant instrument, but if you just simply sit one person in a room once a year and get them to punch out all this information and put a report, then it really adds very little value to your organisation. But if you fundamentally align that into your corporate functional goals and say, right, well, you're going to each improve your own performance in your own aspect of this, then suddenly it starts creating a huge amount of meaning. And look, not only are organisations, but regions, as I said before, starting to, and I don't expect you to read this and you'll get a copy of it, so don't worry about squinting your eyes this early in the morning. But it's about countries really starting to figure out their own path, and there is no perfect path on this, but to your point earlier, if you don't make an attempt to get there, you will really be a laggard and will actually economically disadvantage your own organisation, even if you don't have the moral drive or the social drive or the environmental. It's just fundamentally good business practice and really good governance. So I'll spend 2 seconds about us, and as we were discussing before, I don't see sustainability as IP, so I'm happy to share everything we have, and this is not about me promoting who we are or what we do. I'm happy to share everything, and most of this stuff we also make, it's publicly available. So, but quickly, what we do, the best way to understand is we find land, we buy it, we focus on large urban regeneration projects, so we take small parts of a large city and actually regenerate that into mixed-use developments around the world. But the difference is not only do we put our own money in it, not only do we partner with governments and with private, but we also then, what we design, we build, but we then own and we operate. So in the true essence of sustainability, if we really build something that's of poor performance, we're left holding that for the next 20, 30 years, okay? So it's a fundamentally good business to actually design something with life cycle thinking in mind. Just to give you an idea, operate in Australia, Europe, Americas, and UK, but we are predominantly a development-led business. So we do look at the major urban regeneration projects, and if you've been to Sydney, there's projects like Barangaroo in Sydney, RNA Showgrounds. We're doing Tun Razak Exchange or Lifestyle Quarter in KL, Paya Lebar in Singapore. But we've got large ones in Elephant Castle, San Francisco with Google, London, all across. So this is essentially what we do. And fundamentally, when you start doing this, you are really shaping cities. And it's absolutely critical that you really understand what are the macro challenges in cities. I think that's all fairly straightforward when we do look at gateway cities. And look, this is a quote from one of our founder in 1973, but it's very similar to the Larry Fink remark from BlackRock investors. Really, it's about accounting for financial and non-financial performance. And ultimately, if you do value non-financial performance, it actually drives a greater resilience in your organisation, okay? Oops. So what's key if I was in a board of directors and we were starting to look at the sustainability journey, really take time to understand your business and focus on what matters. Do not try and be everything to everyone. Yes, there are 17 SDGs. You don't need to respond to all 17. So for Lendlease as an organisation, because we're in the real estate, if we look at things like food security, okay? That's not something that we in our organisation indirectly can have a huge degree of impact on in what we do and where we are. But we can certainly impact other aspects of SDGs like renewable energy, like low carbon cities, like training, skilling, employment, like health and well-being, like accessibility, like diversity, okay? So these, make sure your organisation is really focused on what's important. Because if you focus on what's important and what's material, or the word materiality, then essentially you're not having to do the hard sell, and it should resonate with your customers, and it should also resonate as the board of directors and your leadership team. So the way we interpret that maze of things, we essentially look at 3 sustainability imperatives: sustainable economic growth, vibrant, resilient communities, and healthy planet and people. And across those, we've got 3 environmental focus areas and social focus areas. You know, as an organisation, for us, resources and materials, energy, water, waste efficiency in our assets, how we procure timber, steel, concrete, where's it come from, what's its intensity. But then you also look at other aspects such as climate action, nature and pollution, and then we look at the social focus. If we're going to create part of a city, how are we going to make this inclusive? How are we going to make this place accessible so that anyone, no matter what, if you're pushing a wheelchair or you're pushing a pram or you're aged or you're youth, can you get into that part of the city easily? How do you use that part of the city? Is there employment there for you? Is it financially accessible to you, or is it just appealing to the high end of town? And so what we do is we take that, and I encourage the organisations you do, we committed to the UN Principles of Responsible Investment, and so we actually push this into a policy around how we spend our money as an organisation and where we invest. And so from there, we got all our managing directors globally to do that, and that has underpinned us in our assets, particularly around submitting it to a thing called GRES, where we recently were recognised in our performance in GRES, both globally as a leader and in Asia. But it's been a great catalyst for discussions whereby now some of our funds are even not driven by sustainability. They're going, right, we're going to go carbon positive in this fund. And we, you know, for the sustainability fraternity in the organisation, we're kind of going, wow, well, we didn't ask for that. So they're starting to see their investors take a real interest in that. Now, integrating climate risk. Has everyone here heard of the acronym TCFD? There's a lot of acronyms in this space, okay. TCFD is climate-related, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, okay. And a way to think of it is, it's essentially driven by a group of large financial and accounting organisations to say, right, we're sick of seeing all these sustainability reports in organisations that make everyone feel good. There's some couple of qualitative stories, a couple of photos of kids. That's great. You get through those 3 pages and then you read the financials. So it's moving away from that, which I think's greenwash and a bit of corporate speak. What it's essentially doing is saying, right, each year I would like the board to make sure that the share price and the valuations it puts in its annual report actually reflect true climate risk. So suddenly we've got organisations like BHP, Rio Tinto, which are some of the largest ones. They will actually value each mine, saying, well, if the price of energy goes up here or the price of carbon goes up here, this mine actually have a negative valuation on the mine. Therefore, we're valuing this mine going down to $100 million from $500 million over the next 10 years because of the price of carbon. So this is where you're really starting to drive, well, how is climate change and climate scenarios, and how is our business really going to operate in that? And if you're having to do that in your financial report with your board members signing off and your CEO signing off, it's amazing the rigour that then goes into that financial modelling. And so suddenly it stops being a sustainability-driven exercise, and it's actually driven in partnership with legal counsel, your risk management committee, across your board. You're probably going to have a CFO on there. You're probably going to have your head of internal audit. You can have a head of sustainability. So it suddenly starts driving true reflection of climate risk understanding and logic into your business and into your business strategy. So anyway, we committed to that as an organisation, and in 2018, and then that sets you on a bit of a journey, and it's really around disclosing your performance. And today I'll show you, on the right-hand side, we developed Like, how do you get a board to suddenly start thinking about climate change and do this in a way that is digestible and meaningful to them when they're used to looking at numbers and financials that might be on a 5 to 6 to 7 year scenario, and suddenly I want to talk to them about what we're going to be in 50 years? How do I truly get that engagement where they're looking at me going, you know, you obviously haven't had enough sleep because you're not making any sense to me, you're talking about what's in 50 years. But if I look at a real estate company, what we create, and this was the bridge that I managed to work with board members, is that if we're building physically a bridge or a building that's going to exist for 60 years, 70 years, okay, I'll get that, yep. Well, so what's our organisation going to look like in 60 years? Well, okay, and you'll find that most organisations haven't actually had this discussion, and this has been a great catalyst. So what we did was we took climate scenarios, and you are churning a lot of science into something very simple, into getting them to understand what scenario planning is. And now we might just play a little video which gives you an idea of an internal movie we made to get boards of directors understanding what is climate scenario planning, and we'll play a video of what just one of those scenarios means. And so this is for people, executive leadership teams as well as boards, is what we did to try and get that engagement and understanding. So we'll just play that. So when you look at this, to our right is our global leadership team, regional leadership teams. This is how you apply it down to the business, and this is how we're looking at the various climate scenarios on the far right. That's specific to our organisation. So what they really indicate is if you think Paris, if that's under a Paris world, this is where the world's going to be. And then we started looking at, well, what are those temperature scenarios different and how might our organisation operate under those. But you are really sort of trying to stretch that. And with the boards of directors, natural response of leadership teams can go, well, how did you make this up? Have you just, cooked this up in it as an idea? So what this has had to highlight to directors and leadership teams is all the numbers and scenarios that have actually built on internationally recognised sources of information and data. Okay, because naturally you don't want to be creating a scenario that no one else is thinking of. And we're trying to condense a lot of science into a 5-minute video of people that wouldn't normally have to be exposed to this, but So those scenarios there are available on our website, but they'll just give you an idea of how we figured it may affect our organisation. But it's certainly something that has created a fair bit of interest from other organisations. And so what we've been doing is we've been using this and actually having workshops around the world with each of our global leadership teams in each of our geographies, actually playing through this and actually mapping out how that region and how that business would respond to it. And so we had to create an internal website. I think from memory now, what we might do is play a short video of just what one of the scenarios are and how we're trying to get our directors to think about just one of those 4 scenarios.
Mike, this is the business as usual scenario if we don't do anything to mitigate global warming.
So I guess this is where you start to see both the negative consequences, but really how your own organisation might play a role or be exposed. We're obviously in retirement living, that's why we want to ask these sort of questions.
Mike, maybe this is a good time for us to take some questions from the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Because this is such a profound impact on businesses and directors as long-term stewards of the organization have a responsibility to consider this risk and see if there are ways to address it. Does anyone have any questions on this? Rowena.
I have a general one that you seem to be giving the impression that your board of directors needed to be sort of made aware of the climate impact on the business of Lendlease. Maybe I got that wrong. That's the general question. The second one is, do you reckon it's a hard sell if we didn't put economics onto climate change activities? Because we've been talking about this for so long at world events, and you put up a pretty profound chart where despite the rhetoric, the discussions and the many hours that we put into this effort, the emission seems to be rising, and I think that will be true for many, many years ahead. So what do you reckon is the problem here? Is it dollars and cents, and would that move board of directors? Because we are also responsible for the bottom line.
Absolutely. So 2 questions. So with regards to the board, look, we've got a board mixed from quite across from Rio Tinto and exposure to major financial institutions. So they've got quite a diverse board. They are quite aware of it, but they, and a couple of the organisations that the board members are part of have already embarked on the TCF journey. So we're probably quite, I would say the board's fairly informed on this. We do have a sustainability committee at board level, so we do talk about these issues, but I think this was the next step in saying to from a board who's genuinely interested and wants to know more, to going, well, how do you actually implement this into a large global organisation is a very big step. And so that's why this is starting to make this esoteric idea of climate change, how do we start making it real in terms of functional business strategy? How are we setting an organisation? How are we valuing assets? So it's bringing that huge amount of science down into a very small, digestible component such as that, which gets people going, okay, I understand. All we're doing is, let's not get too crazy, we're just trying to understand the scenarios and how what we do will respond to that. And so I think it's making it digestible, and they're then taking this to other organisations they're working on. So it's been a really positive exercise. On your second question, I think it's critical. You can't talk about climate change without actually truly looking at the economic and the social impacts of climate change. It would be completely remiss to do that. It is not just an environmental phenomenon. It is definitely associated with human behaviour and human activity. And when you start looking at things like the emissions trading or price indicators around how carbon is being priced around the world, even if you weren't taking a climate change perspective and you're purely in a finance or legal role, you would start going, hey guys, if I see the price of steel continually going up over the next 15 years, we're bidding on stuff that's going to continue for the next 30 years. How are we pricing that risk into it? So it very quickly relates to financial. The beauty of TCFD is the fact that the CFOs, and it's being driven largely by a CFO and core financial part of our organisation, and that starts creating much greater ownership and better integration into the organisation. So hopefully I've answered the question. Absolutely, but I think, you know, when you're getting share price when you're moving away from sustainability pages in a corporate report to actually share price reflecting true valuation of your organisation, it does become a fairly large shift in the organisation. Oh, sorry, there's a question over there as well.
I would like to follow up on your presentation just now. You mentioned about this non-financial statistic, and probably this is an area that the board of directors is quite interested to see, because all these measures would very much, currently we are very much focused on the financial profitability of a company, but with this initiative, what are the non-financial indicators that be useful for the board of directors to start looking at?
Okay, great one. So non-financial, so with regards to environment, we look at non-financial from our energy consumption annually across every one of our operations globally. We can, water and waste. So for a good example, we've implemented, and I'll show you later on, we've implemented a system globally that I can benchmark a Lendlease shopping centre in Australia with City Mall here, with 313 Somerset in Singapore, and I can understand with the touch of a button the consumption or cost of energy per square metre in any of those shopping malls. I can benchmark them, I can go, here's best, here's worst. We run military housing in the US with 48,000 homes. We can actually benchmark neighbourhoods versus neighbourhood and go, right, well, why is that neighbourhood using, 25% more mains water consumption than this neighbourhood? So very quickly, these environmental indicators, pollution incidents, these are things where, and as well as the environment, we use indicators like how many green buildings we're committing to, so we aim to only build, and we certainly only occupy high performance green buildings. And on the social indicators, we're looking at employment that we're actually driving. We've got learning, skilling and development in community development programs. We've now restructured our internal foundation to actually have a clear mandate around social return on investment indicators and driving that through the organisation. But as well as that, we're heavily investing in health and wellbeing of employees and actually benchmarking that every year with a Bupa Health survey. So this is not just a couple of shiny pages. This is actually about benchmarking, actually having data, performance, getting that externally audited, and actually trying to drive performance in certain areas. So, yeah, I think the environmental and social capital of an organisation, if you look at the cost of running an organisation, is fundamental.
Sorry. Okay. In our organization, we have a very special position set up that I hold that position. It's called corporate governance and business ecosystem, whereby we have to look into the entire balance of how we exist now and future. So the challenge is, because I report independently to all the committees as well as the board, and every time I think some of the concern here is very real. They only focus on financial. So there's a disintegrate there between the financial and the existence in long run. So for our part, when we advocate, it's always to convince them, if you don't do it, what will happen? If you do it, how much you can save. So these are not convincible enough, I think, to the board. So my question here, or maybe just something that sharing, is how to make one more step. I was thinking to put it into their KPIs. So, but there will be a challenge. Why should it be their KPI? And how you want to measure that to the KPI? What I'm thinking is a 360 degree. That means everybody in the entity have a role to play in this. I do not know whether any organization did that, but the moment if it is a KPI, then they will listen more carefully about how to get this through the board agenda.
Yeah, look, I think KPIs, I think a company is certainly skipping a beat if KPIs are only financial. You need non-financial measures of success in KPIs for any leader of an organisation. It's no good if the organisation's profitable but they've got an extremely high turnover because they've got a poor corporate culture, okay? Similarly, it's no good having a high profit turnover if the organisation's in class actions from its environmental performance or otherwise. So I think a measurement of good leadership is actually a bit more of a balanced scorecard around non-financial and financial performance. I know it can sound a bit perverse, but I find it very easy to actually turn a lot of these issues into financial indicators. So I would suggest having a look at your investor base. How many of those what percentage of your investor base has made commitments to low carbon futures and climate reduction? Because they are going to start asking you. So for us, it's large pension funds and so forth. So we're receiving letters going, hey, we've committed to this, we're now pushing ethical investment. What's your stance on this? What's your stance on modern slavery? Okay, well, that's a good question. Here's what we've got. What are you seeking? So I find that, one, I would look at your investors, what their commitments are. Two, I'd look at the products that your organisation may be delivering and using, and how, if you priced carbon, which I'll talk to in 2 seconds, if you priced carbon increases in there, how would that affect the viability of your products? And maybe not only the cost of your products, but maybe the availability of your types of products. If our business is reliant on 70% concrete for buildings, and suddenly the price of carbon goes up and the price of concrete goes up by 40%, if we're doing a partnership with the Malaysian government, they're going to go, well, we've done an agreement for the next 20 years, Lendlease, how are you going to compensate that? And we're going to go, we've got to look at timber. So I think if you just take the time to do that materiality, and I'm happy to sit down and have that discussion. I'll just walk you through how we did it. And it's different for every organisation, but there are key financial indicators in there. So we went through our books and looked at all our insurance claims over the last 10 years and looked at anyone's related to wet weather conditions, extreme weather conditions, hurricanes, things like that. So for your relevant organisation, could be your exposure to energy price if you're a manufacturing facility or an electricity intensive organisation. how is energy priced in your things, and where are you getting carbon financial indicators starting to come in that market? Hopefully I answered your question, but it's definitely part of a broader challenge.
Hello? Yeah, okay. There's also one impact, before I ask my question, is the impact of the environmental things that the company faces. How does the consumer perceive it? Yeah? Is it something that the consumer supports it, or it does not support it? The consumers. Yeah? So that brings to my question, and you don't have to answer this question if you do not want to, because it's quite, I don't know, so it's a nationalistic question. It's regarding palm oil. There's a very strong anti-palm oil lobby in Europe, yeah? And it affects the sale of our palm oil, yeah? And the reason for that, I believe, is sustainability. Because I think there are NGOs or lobbies in Europe saying that there is a lack of reforestation of palm oil in Malaysia, yeah? So the lobbies are very strong, so they are even putting labels on their products, no palm oil, you know, there's no palm oil in their products. So that's how strong and powerful the NGO is now. But you see, I think to me, sustainability, by doing that, and these NGOs are very powerful, it also affects the social standing of the people in Malaysia, because those who are involved in palm oil, they will lose their income will become lower because demand for palm oil is lower, yeah, so it will affect the price, so on and so forth. Yeah? So my question is, who is to judge, yeah, in terms of sustainability, what is wrong and what is right? How far do you go to the point where you think, the reforestation is more important than the livelihood of the people in the country? You don't have to answer. I already said you don't have to answer this question in the beginning, but I'm saying this is, I can give you one example. Shell, Shell wanted to close its oil rig in the North Sea. And how he wanted to do it, because he wanted to do it in an environmental friendly way, he break down the oil rig and put it under the sea. And by doing that, it will develop the coral under the sea. Greenpeace was totally against it. It came on the news totally against it. Shell had no choice they couldn't do the dismantling of the oil rig, so they parked the oil rig in Norway. Yeah? 2 years later, Greenpeace apologized to Shell. Said, Shell, you were right. It's better to dismantle the oil rig and put it under the sea. You see
look, absolutely, yeah. And there is no silver bullet to your question, but I think what you need to, for me, two things. One, you need to have a holistic view in any decision making, and this is a perfect segue into that. So one is a holistic view being, well, what are the social, environmental and financial implications of a decision you're making? And two, you can't take just a short-term approach. So what may look terrible on today, you need to think, okay, well, how long is this going to operate for? Where's the economy going to be? Where's society going to be? Because if we use an argument, and I'm not picking on palm oil, I'll look at the coal industry. We could go and go, well, I need to keep these people in jobs. If I can just delay another 5 years. But the flip side of the argument is, well, if that is an industry of diminishing returns, then aren't we better getting those people employed in the renewable energy sector and actually exposed to new business opportunities and new training and new skilling? So it is a multi-pronged question and a very complex one. And I think for any industry, if it is facing those challenges, I think it's a perfect catalyst for that industry to look at itself and go, okay, well, let's look at ourselves holistically. What are we being challenged on, and what's our industry's response to that? So a good example is timber was challenged for a lot of years. Where's the timber coming from? Is it illegal? Is it hardwoods? Where's it coming from? So suddenly you got the Forestry Stewardship Council and equivalents around the world. And we still rely on timber, but now we know when that timber comes, it's certified, it's sustainably harvested, the local communities where it comes from, there's a full chain of custody and it comes here. And now that's specified in most green buildings all around the world. So you could argue on the flip side of that. But I think you need to take a holistic view and a long-term view of industries to figure out if they are truly sustainable. I'm conscious of time. I should keep going a little bit more. Yep.
On the note of conscionable actions, I have a question here for you that I think would be of interest to everyone here, because from my background of being basically a facilitator and matchmaker between CSR funds of public listed companies and social do-gooders who run social enterprises and do, you know, major social impact and innovation programs, including for climate action. My question to you is, we spend a lot of time persuading public listed companies to give us money for social impact innovation, to prevent natural disasters occurring, to remedy and rebuild lives. Like I spend a lot of time now in Palu, Lombok, Fiji, all these places which are struck by natural disasters. So my question to you is, how can you, Datin Sri, Sunita, and the rest of us in the room, how can we all get together and get the best out of the shareholder value of public listed companies when we want to use it for socio-economic transformation, for disaster management, relief, and things like that? I don't believe in quick fixes. I keep telling my clients, and I keep telling the beneficiaries, even in Lombok, we want to build capacity, we want to teach them how to fish rather than give them fish. But I always face a challenge in a public listed company boardroom, and I think you must face that too, the rest of you here, to build the case for value. And not just tell a company, okay, I just want a check off you, and we'll send off 100 doctors to Indonesia. We'll help to build a school in Palu, things like that. I'm more interested in prevention, you know. And, you know, this gentleman's talk about, dealing with different stakeholders. What kind of assistance can you and your organization give me? Because I actually represent the voices of women in 132 countries, all right, in an organization that has chapters in 132 countries. So it's a very serious question.
Yes. So with regards to that, so if we're looking at, we do have an internal thing called Lendlease Foundation where we direct it. We do have an independent board of directors and how we use the funding and how we look at social return. So one of our own filters are we try and focus on where we have a physical presence, because we're already in a number of countries and there's limited value in us trying to step into a country and provide. So there's two things. So one is where we have a physical presence in the geography, and secondly, where we can add value with our skills. Okay, Lendlease is a property company. We can come in and do temporary disaster relief housing through prefabricated timber homes. Bang, there are people living in them. We can quickly connect water and sanitation, but we wouldn't be the right organisation to help look at sustainable land management practices around farming and agriculture, because that's not our core skill set. So I think if I was in your shoes, I'd be looking at companies at what skill sets they have that you need and then targeting them like that. So I'm often in a position where I've got to, because I oversee what we're doing in Asia in that regards, and going, right, where can we add value? Okay, so if it's in building, refurbishment, construction, regeneration, rejuvenation, we can add value, but we can't others. I'm conscious of time, and I don't think we've even got to the
I
slides.
think you're getting a good feel for the questions and the burning issues that are. If you were to wrap up, how would you describe, what are the few key, most important things that directors should be mindful of?
Can I have 1 minute slot? Yeah? Yeah. Me? Okay. I think the gentleman in front asking how to differentiate between a good initiative or not from an environmental perspective. I think I'm a student of sustainability. Recently, 2017, we started what we call SDG Index, comparing countries. So countries with, initially 2016, only 30 parameters, 10 for economics, social, and 10 for environment. Then you can compare which country is more sustainable in that manner. Then 2017, 18, 19. Moving forward, we are working on sustainability for cities. an organization. So I was fortunate to be involved in this since 2006 with Jeff Sachs from Colombia, developing initially environmental performance index, EPIs, and we are growing from time to time. So what we are comparing now, and we are still struggling to get parameters comparing companies. So if you have an options of oil rig to be disposed, if you do ABC, and this is the index a rating for various options available, I think we have to wait for another few days or few weeks. We'll be coming with a set of SDG index for companies. Thank you.
Okay. I'll quickly wrap up. Okay, if you can give me 2 minutes. So one thing I'd certainly recommend is if you are on a board, we have things called global investment committees. So this is an example of our investment committee template, and it is a multiple page document that has finance, has HR, has EHS, has risk, has legal, but the sustainability page, to give you a quick headline, everywhere we put our money, we ask these questions, and the board of directors must sign off at it, and the regional leadership team must sign off. So is there a project strategy for sustainability? Is it in the commercial viability? Have we resourced? Have we done due diligence on community impact, environmental impact assessment, and climate-related risk assessment? Are we going for third-party certifications to verify what we're doing? And secondly, down the bottom are what sustainability initiatives in particular that we're trying to be a leader on. Okay, just quickly, on climate, someone did ask me the question, well, how do you articulate that? We actually go and model physical risks of the proposal, and we actually also model the cost of carbon at $20 from 2020, 100 and 140 US dollars. So if our retirement livage proposal, our urban regen proposal, our asset doesn't stack up, then that suddenly starts creating a board argument. So these are hard, fast things where you can drive a genuine discussion around investment. And what I mentioned before, setting targets, be bold, don't be afraid to fail, but just be transparent. Be transparent about what you're trying to do and people get on board. And this is a system I was involved in rolling out globally, but it's how we can compare and benchmark our performance anywhere around the world. And if you understand your data and you can get this automated into your organisation, it's amazing the insights you can start to extract out of that. Okay. And this is how we pull this sort of information to some of our management reporting. To the left, you'll see the lines, assets and intensity performance over time. You can actually start to see trends across portfolios and assets. On the right, you can see construction that looks all over the place. What it highlights is that certain ways of targeting things and measuring things in certain industries is different, but it actually starts a genuine discussion with management. So look, you know, community and stakeholder engagement, I think we've talked a little bit about that, but it's critical to really understand beyond the environmental aspect of your organisation, what are the social aspects and how you can actually play a role, to your point there, where you can actually, we can absolutely have a positive impact on foreign construction workers, on people who are going to occupy the assets we create or in the developments we do. We can absolutely be engaged with universities and schools. And this is just how we've embedded it in certain parts of the organisation through commitments. Recently on GRESB, as I mentioned, and in our developments, what we're committing to. This is application of timber. So that's an example of a timber building in Barangaroo in Sydney. Alternative products. And these are the types of urban regeneration developments. This is the Barangaroo project. There's a lot of information. I'm happy to follow this up in another time. But that's an example of where we're trying to apply these principles to a large development where we're trying to be water positive, zero waste, carbon neutral, and look at community development and a large portion of Sydney Harbour there. So you can see up there, there's the Opera House, and that's the Harbour Bridge, and that's the Barangaroo development there with a large headland park that we've also done. So that gives you an understanding of how this is not just corporate, but how we apply this into places that are going to exist for 30 years, 50 years or 70. So hopefully that was insightful, and happy to take any questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Michael's going to be around for a short while in case anybody has any burning questions. So recap, this is something your customers are going to be looking for. This is something that your staff are going to want to know about before they come and work with you. This is something that central banks, financial institutions are going to be emphasizing. Your investors are going to be asking you these questions. It's crucially important that directors are on top of this conversation and can lend to an informed discussion at board conversations. Let's give Michael a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Datin, Sunita, and Michael. That brings us end of the first masterclass. Masterclass 3 will start in a couple of minutes.